Who knew that the woman who was once referred to as the Hollywood doll of the 1960s would go on to become the anti-war symbol that rocked America? In addition to being a talented actress with 2 Academy Awards, Jane Fonda, the daughter of renowned actor Henry Fonda, lived for decades in the public light on the brink of love and hate. She was plagued with remorse for the rest of her life because of the shadowy world of family tragedies that existed behind the spotlight and the sexy pictures that once enthralled millions of men. But the untold tale and the intimate pictures will ultimately show who Jane really is. Watch the entire video to learn about the aspect of her life that was never shown to the public. On December 21, 1937, Jane Seymour Fonda was born in New York City into a family where tragedy and art appear to go hand in hand. Her mother, Frances Brokaw Fonda, was a stunning member of the Canadian upper class, and her father, Henry Fonda, was one of Hollywood's most renowned actors at the time. Her mother was given a mental health diagnosis and sent to a facility for treatment when Jane was just 12 years old. She never returned home. Frances left her small daughter with a wound that will never fully heal when she committed herself out of desperation. Henry, Jane's father, buried his sorrow in silence. Jane later remarked, "I spent my whole life trying to understand why my mother left, but maybe I'll never really know." Soon after, he got married again, but that union also ended in divorce a few years later. Jane had a childhood dream of being a model, which seemed like a safe career choice, given her inherent grace and elegance. Her father's fame made it easy for her to appear on the covers of esteemed publications like Vogue. Even in the midst of her early success, though, Jane sensed a quiet calling that she was unable to identify. Her encounter with Lee Strasberg, the founder of the renowned actor studio and the father of numerous Hollywood icons, was a turning point in her life. "You have talent, Jane," he said to her. It was a simple sentence, yet it had a lasting impact on her life. One day, Jane remembered, when he said that, something inside me woke up. For the first time in my life, I felt I could actually do something meaningful. Her desire to become an actress was sparked, and she was determined to pursue it. Jane left Vassar College before she could graduate and entered the theater industry. She made her Broadway debut in the romantic comedy Tall Story in 1960. When she made her cinematic debut 2 years later, Walk on the Wild Side immediately gained popularity and won her first Golden Globe. However, the glory was short-lived. Because of her unsuccessful performance in The Chapman Report, the Harvard Lampoon mockingly dubbed her the worst actress of the year the following year. However, Jane made the decision to move forward rather than give up. She made a significant breakthrough 3 years later in 1965 with Cat Bella Lou, one of the biggest box office successes of that year. Jane Fonda became a worldwide sex icon by 1968 thanks to Barbarella. Her career flourished in the ensuing years, marked by a number of noteworthy honors. When Jane Fonda was at the top of her game in 1978, she took a risk. She would only take on parts that had important societal messages. She turned down numerous rich offers as a result of that decision, which also led to one of the most difficult periods in her life and career. She re-examined the wounds from her early years in the HBO documentary Jane Fonda in 5 acts. Only after her mother's passing did Jane learn that her mother, Frances Ford Seymour, had bipolar disorder. "I tried to understand her," Jane murmured, her eyes welling with tears. "However, I was never truly aware of her identity. That harsh reality left her with a scar that would never go away and a shadow that haunted her for years. Even though she didn't talk about it much, the guilt permeated every speech, performance, and brave choice she made in her life. The loss of her mother was an eerie tragedy. While in a mental hospital, Frances killed herself with a razor blade, a picture so horrifying that it still makes people tremble. The renowned actor Henry Fonda, Jane's father, informed his kids that their mother had passed away after a heart attack. Before discovering the reality in an article in a cinema magazine, Jane had been believing the myth for years. She described that moment as slicing through my youth like a knife. After that day, her entire world fell apart. Jane stated in her biography, "My life so far, that discovering the truth about her mother's passing was a path toward her own freedom rather than merely a quest for information. I always believed that I had moved on and forgiven her, but in reality, I never truly had." She began writing about the past as a means of addressing her past traumas and demonstrating to herself that she was not the cause of her mother's decision to pass away. Jane acknowledged in an interview with People that she used to be angry at her parents for not showing her the kind of love she deserved. But after years of introspection, she realized that I wasn't unlovable. They simply had difficulties of their own. Finally realizing that allows you to forgive and find compassion. Jane was able to make amends with her father, who had been emotionally aloof for the majority of her life, thanks to this understanding. For the sole purpose of acting with her father, Jane bought the rights to the play on Golden Pond and made it into a movie in order to fill that gap. In addition to being a critical and financial triumph, the project served as an emotional reunion for two broken hearts who had at last connected via art. A historic first for a Hollywood parent-child pair, the father and daughter were both nominated for Oscars. Henry Fonda died not long after the movie came out. "I want to be your friend." Jane later revealed that she muttered, holding his hand in his last moments. And it was the first and last time she had ever said those words. Just two souls, previously split apart by suffering, now brought together in a single tearful touch. No cameras, no scripts. However, Jane Fonda never led a tranquil existence. Beneath the glitz, she continued to struggle with emotional wounds and was a lonely lady. When asked, "What have you learned about love after all these years?" in a 2017 interview with Entertainment Weekly, Jane, who was 80 at the time, smiled sadly. "Nothing. Love wasn't my destiny." In her memoir, Jane talked openly about her youth, her passions, her follies, and her numerous romantic escapades. A year later, she told Extra, "I don't date anymore. I had someone a few years ago, but now I've closed up shop." When she was 18, she fell in love with actor James Franciscus for the first time and realized what it meant to feel fully mature, both physically and emotionally. Following that, Jane's list of partners grew longer, revealing a woman divided between a strong desire to be loved and a similar fear of love. The iconic picture of Brigitte Bardot was developed by French director Roger Vadim, whom she met in 1963. Vanessa Vadim is the daughter of their 1965 marriage. However, the waves of change were too strong for their marriage to endure. Their love waned over time as Jane's involvement in social movements and anti-war activities increased. They discreetly split up by 1972. Jane surprised the nation by marrying political activist Tom Hayden while 3 months pregnant, just 3 days after their formal divorce. Over the course of their nearly 2-decade marriage, they adopted an African-American daughter, Mary Lana Williams, and had a son, Troy Giddy. However, Jane once more witnessed the disintegration of another family. Their official divorce in 1990 signaled the beginning of yet another painful chapter in a life that didn't appear to be going to be easy. Following her turbulent marriage to Tom Hayden, Jane met Ted Turner, CNN's creator and a multi-billionaire with a reputation for being erratic and free-spirited. Jane once described Turner as the type of man who was both irresistibly charming and endlessly challenging, making her laugh and cry every day. They remained together for almost 10 years after being married in 1991. However, Jane made the decision to leave after realizing she had been in someone else's orbit for too long. She was married for the last time. Jane started dating music producer Richard Perry, who was kinder than Turner. They shared a passion for creativity and the arts and lived together for a number of years before their relationship ended in 2017. Looking back, Jane acknowledged that the need to be loved, to be seen, and to fill the emptiness left by her mother's passing was the core of all of her romances. When Jane was just 12 years old, her mother committed herself, leaving her with a lifelong scar and the belief that she would never be worthy of love. Jane Fonda was a strong, brave, seductive, and clever lady on screen. However, she was a frail person who struggled with addiction and insecurity for many years behind the scenes. She once remarked, in a tone that was both thankful and sorrowful, "It's a miracle that I'm still alive and working at 80. Jane's father, the renowned actor Henry Fonda, reared her since she had no mother. However, his teachings frequently felt more like chains than consolation. He used to say that a lady had to be flawless. It took me a long time to realize we're not meant to be perfect. We're meant to be whole," Jane admitted years later in an interview with Oprah Winfrey. After a lifetime of pressure and deception, she found liberty in that insight and was able to forgive herself at last. Jane had 2 lives during her childhood, one in the background and one for the general public. She appeared to be the perfect woman, a role model, an activist, and a movie star. On the inside, though, she was terrified of the mirror. Jane didn't have the guts to take off that mask till she was in her middle years. However, her body betrayed her just as her spirit was starting to find peace. As though fate were trying to test her one last time, illness struck. Jane was diagnosed with osteoporosis and breast cancer in the late 2000s. She had a mastectomy and bounced back fast. However, the next year, medical professionals discovered another cancerous growth on her lip. In 2022, there was more heartbreaking news shortly after. One type of blood cancer is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Jane declared that her cancer had gone into remission following months of chemotherapy. Later, she realized that her body had suffered from years of careless living, tanning, and rebellious adolescence. "When I was young, I worshipped the sun," she stated. "I now understand that the same light burnt me as much as fed me." Jane has stated that she enjoys her life today and would not want to be young again, despite her severe health struggles. A life in which she can finally decide how her last chapter will play out. Jane Fonda ignited a cultural revolution in 1982. In addition to encouraging millions of American women to venture outside the kitchen, her VHS tape, Jane Fonda's Workout, came to represent empowerment and self-reliance. It was more than just an exercise program, with over 17 million copies sold. For a whole generation, it was a proclamation of independence. Ironically, the woman who was acclaimed as the fitness queen used to detest working out. Jane would come up with any excuse to skip gym class while she was a student. She subsequently acknowledged, with a half-sheep, half-joking smile, "I was the kind of person who'd rather read a book than run a mile." She once spent 5 days in the hospital due to tiredness after friends forced her to attend a cycling lesson. In actuality, Jane's joints were exceptionally flexible because to an uncommon biological advantage called as double-jointed tendons. This quality allowed her to do yoga and pilates poses that others would need months to learn. Viewers saw a radiant, powerful, and effortlessly elegant lady when the camera caught her working out like Jane Fonda. They were unaware that a large portion of her perfection was due to a special body that nature had given her rather than constant training. She excelled on television thanks to the same physical gift. She portrayed a seductive space visitor from the future in the 1968 sci-fi classic Barbarella, a part that involved numerous wire acrobatics, body bends, and intricate action scenes. Director Roger Vadim, Jane's then-husband, once said she moves as if gravity doesn't exist because of how effortlessly she handled them. However, few could have predicted that beneath her remarkable agility lied a spirit equally uncompromising. In the 1970s, it would establish Jane Fonda as one of the most fearless women Hollywood had ever seen. In 1970, Jane Fonda experienced one of the most startling events of her life. She was detained by Cleveland police at the time on suspicion of possessing drugs. Accusations that were later shown to be untrue and are generally thought to have been politically motivated by pressure from the Nixon White House. The following morning, a group of fans yelled her name as she was led handcuffed to court. Jane suddenly lifted her fist into the air. During that time, the famous "Power to the People" salute served as a symbol of resistance and defiance. It became famous when Jane chuckled and said, "I have double-jointed hands. All I have to do is bend them a bit and I can slide right out." No one could comprehend how she had gotten her hand out of the shackles, both defiant and symbolic. It was a metaphor for releasing the bonds of power and discrimination as well as a physical act of liberation. Jane Fonda exited the courts as a new emblem of freedom, despite receiving a $5,500 fine. From that point on, her name was associated with a champion of justice, as well as Hollywood's queen, a woman who had the courage to stand up for what she believed in, act on it, and take responsibility for it. Jane responded, "Activism changed me. It made me stop seeing the world through the lens of myself and start seeing myself through the lens of the world." When asked why a glamorous movie star would choose the challenging path of activism, Jane said, "From that point on, she refused to take roles merely for fame or money, choosing only the scripts that reflected her beliefs, stories about justice, equality, and human rights." From protesting the Vietnam War to supporting women's rights, environmental protection, and more recently, the Black Lives Matter movement, Jane Fonda has remained a powerful voice for social causes from the 1970s until today. She has visited impoverished neighborhoods to organize aid programs, opened her home to shelter persecuted activists, and helped raise funds for human rights organizations. At times, her actions led people to label her dangerous or even un-American, but Jane never wavered. In one interview, she said, "I used to be a sex symbol. I now wish to represent change." One of the most pivotal moments in Jane Fonda's activist career was her 2-week trip to North Vietnam in 1972, where she saw firsthand the war she had publicly denounced and vehemently opposed, as well as the military policies of the United States. Even now, well into her 80s, she continues to march in protests, still gets arrested during climate demonstrations, and still stands proudly with silver hair, a radiant smile, and the same unwavering spirit that has defined her for more than 60 years. Fonda's activism, however, went far beyond street protests. She transformed art itself into a form of resistance. In Coming Home 1978, she depicted a woman battling the psychological effects of war, revealing the invisible wounds that thousands of veterans endured. In 9 to 5, 1980, she and Dolly Parton and Lily Tomlin gave voice to women fighting against sexual harassment, unequal pay, and the hardships of working life. For Fonda, every role was more than just art. It was an act of politics.
Even her well-known fitness video, Jane Fonda's Workout, sold over 17 million copies, wasn't just a commercial success. She donated all the profits to the Campaign for Economic Democracy, a movement that promoted economic equality and workers' rights. Strong, self-reliant, and driven, Jane never stopped marching for decades. She was arrested multiple times for civil disobedience, and she continued to protest, this time for climate action, during the CO-19 pandemic. When she was unable to take to the streets, she turned to the internet, and her Instagram live streams became a platform for artists, politicians, and activists to speak out against injustice. Jane frequently referred to herself as a nightmare for weak governments, and it was true. Every time she appeared, she carried a message, a conviction, and an energy that demanded the world's attention. However, beneath the political slogans and bright lights, there was still a deeply vulnerable Jane Fonda. I regret not being a better mother. She once acknowledged that the woman who could overthrow entire political systems frequently felt helpless when it came to her own family. Her oldest daughter, Vanessa Vadim, went on to become a documentary filmmaker, carrying on her mother's social legacy. Her son, Troy Garrett, found his calling in acting, embodying the creative force of the Fonda family. And her adopted daughter, Mary Lana Williams, who had experienced a childhood of poverty, a father in prison, and an alcoholic mother. After learning about Mary's story, Jane didn't hesitate to open her home and give her a fresh start. I have to deserve love, and I'm trying every day, she remarked. Those words weren't just a confession, they were a philosophy of life. That no matter how long and difficult the battle has been, it's never too late. After declaring her retirement in 1991, many people thought Jane Fonda would quietly retire from the spotlight. But 14 years later, she made a stunning comeback in Monster-in-Law 2005 with Jennifer Lopez, a box office hit that proved her star power had never diminished. In 2009, she returned to Broadway after nearly 50 years with 33 variations, followed by memorable roles in The Butler, 2013, Better Living Through Chemistry, This Is Where I Leave You, 2014, and even a guest voice role on The Simpsons. The third act of Fonda's life really began with Netflix's Grace and Frankie, 2015, a 7-season series that transformed Jane and Lily Tomlin into icons of resilient aging. Women who still knew how to love, laugh, lie, and reclaim joy on their own terms. She reunited with Robert Redford in 2017 for Our Souls at Night, a heartfelt love story about connection in later life. Jane continued to move forward after Grace and Frankie ended in 2021, appearing in Amazon Prime's annual Departed with her signature grace, wit, and insight. Jane Fonda recently spoke with calm wisdom in an interview with People. I want my life to be an example for young people. I've lived well, worked hard, and lived with purpose. At this point, I don't need to prove anything anymore. Her words seem to perfectly capture her journey, a life marked by bravery, introspection, resiliency, and passion. In retrospect, Jane Fonda is more than just a Hollywood icon. She is a symbol of awakening, a woman who transformed celebrity into a force for humanity and transformed personal tragedies into a collective strength. We see not just a movie star, but an entire era, one based on conviction, compassion, and a heart that has never stopped beating for the world.